A friend sent me a piece about having inner peace, and I'd like to begin this evening by going over this little snippet with you. It says, if you can start the day without caffeine. Now, if you got this on the internet already, don't let the thing go. If you can always be cheerfully ignoring aches and pains, if you can resist complaining and boring people with your troubles, if you can eat the same food every day and be grateful for it, if you can understand when loved ones are too busy to give you any time, if you can take criticism and blame without resentment, if you can conquer tension without medical help, if you can relax without liquor, then chances are, if you can sleep without the aid of drugs, you're probably the family dog. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? We live in a world that's pretty much full of stress and a lot of tension and strain, and the dog is a good illustration of the way that life can be. In fact, Solomon talks about the dog in 3 cases. I just want to show you 3 verses. We won't discuss these 3 verses, but Solomon talked about as a dog returns to his own vomit, so a fool repeats his own folly, and I think we get the meaning of that, so we'll move on to the next one. He says, who passes by meddles in a quarrel not his own is like someone who takes a dog by the ears. Now, you might have a little more trouble with that one, but imagine if you would, that there's just some old stray dog and you decide you're going to grab it by the ears and pick it up. And then you rally him up a little bit. Now you got to let him go. Now what do? Things get really bad. As long as you got him here, it's okay. When you let him go, he's loose, you see. So when you take a dog by the ears, it's not a good thing. And Solomon also made this comment, but for him who is joined to the living, there is hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion, and we could look at that some other time if you want. And then we have our own ideas about dogs and what have you. Mark Twain is attributed to saying, if you pick up a starving dog, make him prosperous, he will not bite you. That's the principal difference between man and dog, and there's a lot of truth in that one. I personally like this one. Life is like a dog sled team. If you're not the lead dog, the scenery never changes. There's a lot of truth to that one in there. And then we'll say something like, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. And there are good lessons to be learned when we look at the animal kingdom. No question about it. We ought to pause now and then. Isn't that what Romans 1, and I believe it's verse 20, that talks about in this creation we see even the invisible attributes of God? And so there's things to be learned in nature. And we ought to be giving our attention to that sometimes in our meditation time. We have been sharing planet Earth with the animal kingdom for over 6,000 years now. Think about that for a second. 6,000 years, and animals are pretty much just doing what animals always did. Fish, like goldfish, swim around in the bowl and look cute at you. Cats ignore you because they think they're better than you. And dogs are just pretty much content being your best friend. Unless they're in Mexico, then they're going to be a taco. But otherwise, animals just get along pretty good without too much trouble, don't they? Now, animals have stress now and then. There's natural disaster that will stress an animal, which doesn't happen too often, but it can. And there are abusive people that will stress an animal. But for the most part, animals just get up and get along and do what they do. And they don't worry about liquor and caffeine and all those other things. They just live out their time here, and that's what animals do. Now, we, on the other hand, we in 6,000 years have made some marvelous, fantastic technological gains. We love our gadgetry, our internets, our cell phones, our iPhones, our everything else that we can do, and it's all nothing wrong with it. And we have done all these things supposedly to make life simpler. Isn't that what we claim? And I think we're lying to ourselves. We have all this gadgetry that's going to make life easier, and I don't want to go back to pre-gadgetry days, but look at the stress. Look at the level of tension and anxiety and worry that's in our world today overall. I'm sure there's always been some, but it seems to be prevalent, and it seems just to really dominate. In fact, we have created slogans to help us understand the level of stress in our modern society. We'll say things about road rage and car wars. Car Wars is a little play off the old Star Wars movie if you're not familiar with that, but we have that one. We have the one going postal. I'll guarantee you that 100 years ago no one ever had a clue what going postal was, but we sure know it without any trouble at all. The rat race of life. I don't think many people long ago would have said much about that. Living in the fast lane, the jet set, and those kind of things. Or how about being stuck in the hamster wheel? Or being stuck on the treadmill of life? And we'll talk about burning the candle at both ends, and just on and on and on we'll go to show you just how amazingly wonderful we are with all our gadgetry. And yet we are one stressed out society. And you can see it just by looking through the newspaper at the crimes and the things and the events that unfold. It unfolds because people feel like they're on the edge of a cliff. And the more I feel like I'm on the edge of that cliff, and the more I feel like I'm off balance, the littler and littler, the smaller the insult, the slight, the push, the more it threatens me. Have you ever run into somebody and they blow up over something little bitty? I'll just about guarantee you they view themselves on the edge of a bottomless pit. And they've got one foot dangling out there in the air and the other one doesn't have too good a footing. And they're afraid the smallest little thing will push them on over. People who are way back from the edge of the cliff and don't worry about falling off the edge, they're a lot of fun. They'll deal with stuff all day long and they'll take it, they'll roll with it because they don't think. One thing goes wrong and I'm dead. And it's all over. Too many people live like life. Life has a knife at their throat. And if they make one mistake, it's over. And it's not. But that's the way a lot of folks live their life nowadays. There's a lot of stress. Now, there's an answer to stress. Now, there's no way to get rid of the situations. There's just a way to manage and mitigate and to kind of handle and learn to roll with the flow like I believe so many generations in the past did. And you'll be glad to know that the answer is intellectually, wonderfully, marvelously simple answer. You can have, as we would have here in Philippians 4, verse 6 and 7, the peace that passes understanding. You can have it. And I'm going to give you the answer with just a little more introduction with just 2 words in just a moment. But I want to do a little introduction to the answer because it's so simple, I'm afraid you'll miss it. Or maybe stumble into a little naivety and not really get the profundity of this particular answer. So if you'll allow me for a moment to remind you of the diet example, I want to remind you of how that works. To lose weight, from an intellectual perspective, nothing to it. Well, just to understand what you need to do, and I won't use my 2 words, eat less, you just need to create a calorie deficit. All you've got to do to lose weight is burn more calories than you take in. Now, isn't that simple? Now, that means you can cut your food back a little bit, and that way your body will burn more calories than you take in, your weight's going to go down. Or you can get your activities going more, and you can burn more calories than you eat, and your weight's going to go down. Or you can take one of them fancy gadget pills that's supposed to bind with your carbohydrates and the fat that you eat, like that good old pizza we had today. And it's supposed to lock all of that up so your body can't absorb it, and that creates a calorie deficit. And if you can create that calorie deficit, you're going to lose weight. That's just the way it works. Now, I know there's a couple of medical situations where that ain't going to work, but for the average healthy person, that's just the way it is, and the laws of physics are going to work every single time. So if it's that easy, why is it that most of us, and myself included, are overweight? We look at the weight charts, and I look there and I go, 5'10", well, no, I'm 5'11" with heels. I'm 5'11 and a half with really high heels on. Don't want to get too high because that'd be bad. But nonetheless, I get the biggest, highest heels on, and I go, well, I'm big bone, you know. I got really big bones. And I start looking at the chart, and it goes, your max weight is 160. What? What idiot made that chart? We start getting all upset, but I ain't seen 160 since I was 16. But it's so easy. All I got to do is create a calorie deficit. Why are most Americans overweight when the answer is so astoundingly simple? And the reason is because just because you've got the answer doesn't mean it's easy to implement. Solomon, the wisest man in the world, right? He understood things that we're still not sure what all he understood. He understood wisdom beyond anybody else, and whose life was more messed up than Solomon's. He knew the answers. He knew that he knew the answers. And yet scholars still debate whether he ever straightened out his life or if he died in the middle of that mess, and I'll let you have your own opinion on that. But the point is, just because you know the answer doesn't mean it's easy to do. And thus, most Americans are fat, and most Americans have other problems because the answers are hard to implement. Now, with that little introduction, are you ready for the answers of stress and tension and strain and anxiety? And I'm going to start off with 2 words. And then I'm going to elaborate because it'd be an awful short sermon if I start right there. Now, I understand a lot of you'd feel a little relief if I did it that way, but I'm going to go on to my normal allotted time. Trust God. It's that simple. It's as easy as saying, eat less. You want to manage stress. Now, again, you can't get rid of the things that cause stress. This is life. But you want to learn to manage it and be able to handle it and look it in the face and have confidence and keep your balance about you. To trust God. Now, let me elaborate on that a little bit because this doesn't really say it well enough. I want you to absolutely trust God. Bear with me a minute. I want you to altogether absolutely trust God. What I want you to do is I want you to completely, absolutely, altogether trust God. This is the kind of trust that we're talking about. I'm talking about earnestly trusting God with all your heart. I want it to be an enthusiastic trust that says, this is what I want to do. It's got to be entirely, you can't omit the tiniest fragment, the atom, nothing of your heart can be omitted from this trust. It's got to be fervent. It's got to be bubbling up from the depths of you. This is the absolute, altogether, complete, earnest, enthusiastic, entirely, fervently trust that we're talking about. It's got to be flawless. It has got to set your mind on God and say, that is my God. That is my Father. He knows what is going on. It's full. It's complete. There's no room for any more of this trust whatsoever in your heart. It is in every single respect. It is lock, stock, and barrel. This is the kind of trust we're talking about. We're not done yet. It is passionate trust. It is one that is infused with love. It is perfect trust that says, it is my God and He is perfect. In Him is no shadow of turning. He will not lie to me. It is thoroughly placed in God without any hesitation. It is totally in Him. It is unconditionally in Him. Need to pause on that one. So many of us come to God and we say, I'm going to present my body a living sacrifice. Lord, I'm going to throw myself upon the mercy of your court. Now, Lord, this is the conditions upon which I will do that. No, it doesn't work that way. We throw ourselves upon His court unreservedly, totally trust Him, utterly in every respect, willingly, with all your heart, wholeheartedly, and wholly. And there I about ran out my thesaurus and had to quit, or we'd have done a couple of more. But you get the idea. It's so easy to say, well, you just trust God. Well, yes, you do. But do you understand the depth of what we're really talking about there? Well, I think this list does a pretty good job, but, you know, us preachers, I've got some more to add to it. So let's talk about this absolute trusting God and why it is a scary thing to trust God. And trusting God is a scary thing. And the reason it's a scary thing is because His agenda doesn't go the direction my agenda wants to go. And it's that way for all of us. And so here we are. I'm saying trust God. Put yourself on the altar of God's mercy, grace, love, however you want to say it. Give yourself completely over to Him. But you're going, yeah, but really what I wanted in life was... And you got this checklist of things that's on your agenda, and it's a pretty long list. And then you're looking at God and you're going, I don't know that He'll do that for me. And it's scary to let go and to let God. But what you got to do is what Matthew 10:29 says, is you got to understand that He knows what's going on. He is in control. He sees even when a sparrow falls. Think about that for a moment. When I say absolutely, totally, completely, enthusiastically, fervently trust God, I'm saying this is my Father. He's sitting up in heaven, and He sees even when a sparrow falls. He sees everything that's going on in our life, and we can trust that completely. And when I learn that I can trust that none of this is taking Him by surprise, He's been watching it all, then I can start moving toward that absolute, total, complete trust. That, again, it's not going to take away the events, but it's going to give me a new perspective on the events. Let's talk about Job for a second. Job 2:10, lost everything, right? Job does not know what you and I know. We know about when the sons of God came before God and they made their various proposals and Job challenged God. We know what was going on in the background because we have the writing there to tell us. Job didn't know what was going on in the background. Job was just there. He's just a guy going about his business, a very prosperous business, and one day his servants come up and say, hey, we just lost all of the, and then when Evelyn comes up while that one's still speaking and says, we just lost all of the, and all of a sudden he's got nothing, and somebody else comes up and says, and all your kids were killed too. And he's got nothing but a nagging wife. And I'm not sure why Satan left it unless it was because she encouraged him to curse God and died, and Satan was using her. I don't know what's going on there exactly. But in all of this that Job suffered, he said, you speak as one of the foolish women speak. Now this is profound. Shall we indeed accept good from God? And shall we not accept adversity? And in all of this, Job did not sin. Now, I'd like to say more about that last, but that'd have to be another lesson. In all that Job went through, and think about Job's experience, he was depressed, he was sorrowful, he was sad, he was tearful at times, but he did not sin. I think that's important to understand, but that's not the direction I want to go in the lesson. But I do want to remind you that when you feel sorrowful, depressed, and tearful, that is not sin. In everything that Job experienced, he did not sin. And it says it at the beginning, it says it at the end. Job committed no sin in his anguish and his suffering. But at the same time, Job looked beyond with the eye of faith. And he said, you know, I've accepted a lot of good from God. I'm going to accept bad from God too. Naked I came, naked I'll return. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He put his faith 100%, absolutely, lock, stock, and barrel, completely, wholly, wholeheartedly, fervently, and all those other words. And I didn't memorize the list, or I'd give it to you again. He did that. Even in fact, he went on so far as to say, even though he slay me, yet will I trust him. That is the kind of trust that Job had. Thus, Job could maintain his faithful perspective through trials that I think most of us can't even begin to imagine. And yet Job did not sin. And brethren, that's the key right there. You want it, you're going to have them, you're going to cry from times. There's no way around that. But you want to be able to keep your eye on heaven and keep moving forward and not sin in the midst of your grief. That is managing the trials and the troubles and the ups and downs, is keeping your fidelity. That's what Job did. Now, when you can get there and say, God sent good, God sent bad, I'm going to take it. It's from the hand of God. Either way, just fine with me, because what I want is a relationship with God. Now you got something. Let's take that another level, because we have another statement here in Ecclesiastes 7:14 that Solomon wrote that is very similar. In the day of prosperity, be joyful. But in the day of adversity, consider. Get this next statement. Surely God has appointed the one as well as the other. In the day of prosperity, you go ahead and enjoy it. And the day of adversity, you consider. They're both part of God's plan. They're both part of God's design. When He put this world together, He knew what was coming. He put it together for His own reasons, His own purposes. He did not put together a beautiful, rosy path that has no sorrow or trouble. He put this together. That's what Solomon is saying. Let's read it again. And the day of prosperity, be joyful. You might want to tack onto that 1 Timothy 1:18. He gave us all things to enjoy. But in the day of adversity, consider, surely God has appointed the one as well as the other. And when God looked down the quarter of time, and I like the Isaiah 46:10, there's nothing happening that surprises Him. There's nothing that He goes, oh, I didn't see that coming, or oh, I didn't mean for that to happen. Now, I know He doesn't prove sin, but He knew man would sin, and thus Christ is the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. He knew it was coming. It's not that He delights in it, but there's nothing that takes Him by surprise. And so when He looks at the various troubles and struggles in anybody's life, He saw it coming. He knew it was coming. He appointed one as well as the other. Remember, that's what Solomon said, isn't it? God has appointed the one as well as the other. And so when I absolutely, totally, completely, fervently, enthusiastically trust Him, I look beyond the veil of this physical existence and I say, that's my Father. He appointed one as well as the other. I might not get it. I might not understand it all. And brother, I don't. But He's the one that set it up at some way, at some level, at somehow. It's all because of God's great providence that this whole system has the opportunity to unfold as it does. Now, I'm sure that some of you will be thinking about Ecclesiastes 9:11. Time and chance happens to them all. I do not believe that God ordained, appointed every single event that happened in life. I think God set up a system. He set up some parameters, if you would. He set up some laws of the physical universe and so on and so forth. And everything, and now this is just my opinion now, but I'm of the opinion that most things just pretty much hum along under the watchful eye of God without a lot of Him reaching in and tinkering. It is my opinion that the direct interventions of God would be the very small minority of time, not the majority of time. And that for the most part, God Himself is content to let things unfold according to the system that He set up, and He is watchful of it. Now, should something occur that He does not want to occur, it ain't going to happen. He has appointed all things, or He has permitted all things, and I incline that the majority of things are simply permitted. Now, that's just my opinion, and that's open to debate. It's where on the scale you want to put some things. Obviously, some things were appointed specifically, and some things have just happened randomly, and somewhere in there, there's a balance, and I tend to lean on the permissive. He just lets things happen. He gave us the will, the wisdom, the ability, and said, y'all manage it. We have made a mess of it nonetheless. But that's my thinking. I'll just share that with you. I don't believe God's appointed every little single thing to happen. But At the same time, he did appoint this system. He did create this system. He did create mankind and governments and various authorities at different levels, starting at the home with the parent all the way up to government, and said, y'all have got it, run it. And he knew we'd make a mess of it, but he still gave it to us and said, y'all do it. And he sits back and he's aware of everything that happens, and none of it surprises him. And so we look beyond and we say, you know, God's aware, God knows. If he didn't want it to happen, it wouldn't. I'm going to absolutely, totally, completely trust in him with all my heart, with every fiber of my being. I'm not going to let one atom withhold my trust from him. But it's still a scary thing to trust God, because we know that God works on his own timetable. And this is another problem with trusting God. Let's run through 5 examples very quickly here. Daniel 3:20. Where is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when God delivers them? They're in the fire. Think that one out. And see, here's how I want it to work. The king has raised his golden image. Me and my buddies, we've refused to bow down because we're faithful to God. Word gets to the king and he calls us and says, bow or I'm going to kill you. And all of a sudden the heavens open up and there's this big audible voice from heaven that says, King, leave my people alone. And the king trembles and shakes and says, oh, I'm sorry, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Y'all go ahead. Y'all are excused. Not the way it worked, is it? They say, oh, king, we don't need to answer you. We know we're not going to bow down. They showed respect, but they stood their ground. And then he throws them into the fire. And then God delivers them. That's not the timetable I want, but that's God's timetable. Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel 6:16. Where is Daniel when God delivers him? He's in the lion's den. I mean, he spent all night in the lion's den. Now again, here's what I want to happen. They open up the mouth of the lion's den, they start to throw me in, and God magically transports me away to some other place. And I don't have to stand there in the midst of lions all night long wondering, when are they going to leap? At what point did Daniel understand God has delivered me? Think it was the first 5 minutes? Or after 15 minutes and the lions didn't attack? Or do you think maybe at 2 o'clock in the morning he was still standing there kind of thinking, it's been good so far, but see, that's God's timetable. That's the way God does it. Abraham, Genesis 22:10. When is it God speaks to him and says, don't kill Isaac? After he has stretched out his hand and taken the knife. And most of us, of course, would envision taking the knife. You know, he's raised the knife and he's ready to bring it down, and God stays his hand at the last second. God's timetable. It's a scary timetable. And yet here's the preacher telling you to absolutely trust God completely. And then there's Stephen, Acts 7 and verse 60. When did God deliver him? Oh, he didn't, did he? He let him die. Acts 7:60. You can go back and read the whole story. Or Revelation 2 and 13, Antipas. When did God deliver him? Well, he didn't. He let him die too. And so when we talk about absolutely trusting God and his agenda doesn't always go where mine wants to go, that's absolutely true. But name me a better source to trust. Trust God with all your heart, absolutely, completely. Do what you can to be a good steward of your situation and press on. Trusting God, again, is scary because God doesn't believe in the American dream. Now, I realize that does about sound blasphemous, but God does not believe in the American dream. 1 Timothy 6:8, if you got food and clothing, with these you shall be content. God's not worried about whether you have a 3-bedroom house with 2 full baths and 2 or 3 cars in the garage and so on and so forth. God says, if my people have got this, then I'm telling them to be happy with it. Now, none of us have that minimum, and yet we sure get uptight sometimes about our stuff, don't we? We'll trust God, but Philippians 4:12, Paul, he learned to be content. Whether he was in abundance or in poverty, he learned it. That's how God does things. And Paul, personally my hero of the New Testament, next to Christ, of course, this hero, and I apologize for the small print, but I wanted to get more of it up here. You can look this up in 1 Corinthians 11, starting at verse 22. Paul, God's apostle to the Gentiles, God's man for that generation, that time, and generations to come, was in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, and deaths often. From the Jews, 5 times he received 40 stripes minus 1. Not just one time did they beat him, 5 different occasions. They racked his body with 39 blows. Yeah, God doesn't believe in the American dream. But God believes in the eternal dream, if you would, that home in heaven that Christ went to prepare for us. This is the God that we serve. But it's scary. Now I want to bring it to a close, but this is a little longer close than what we're normally used to. The straight and narrow way. It's a difficult way. Folks, I don't think that this really is talking about, oh man, I feel like I need to go rob a bank. I'm really having this temptation with robbing a bank, and I'm just really fighting this temptation to rob a bank. How many of you really ever struggled with robbing a bank? You know, how many of you ever got up in the morning and said, boy, I could use $10. Do I go to the ATM or do I go knock off the 7-Eleven? I'm really not sure. You know, 7-Eleven is closer. You know, those aren't the difficult things. The difficult things, now some sin is difficult to understand, but the difficult things is learning to absolutely, totally, completely, fervently, with all your heart, all your being, all your mind, lock, stock, and barrel, trust God. Even when He says, you're going to get beat with 40 lashes minus 1 5 times when you serve me, but you're going to be my apostle to the Gentiles. You're going to be in prison a lot, but you're going to be my apostle to the Gentiles. That's trust. Job, even though he slay me, yet will I trust him. That's trust. And that's what we're talking about. And that, I believe, really fits the narrow, difficult way. Can you put your heart absolutely in God's hands when things aren't going according to your agenda? Romans 12:1, that presenting your body a living sacrifice. Brethren, that's a straight and narrow way. That's a challenge. Matthew 10:28, not worrying about the body. Now, logically, that should not be a problem at all. We're all dead anyway. We're just trying to figure out when it's going to happen. Now, I hope I give my 70 to 80, but I know somewhere in there, one of these days I'm dead. It's just a matter of when. Why is that such a problem then? I don't know, but we sure get hung up on it. But He says you ought to fear God, because He can destroy the body and the soul in hell. So, Colossians 3:1 and 2. You set your mind on heaven. And that's where you keep your focus, even when all the world around you is calling you another direction. You say, no, 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 no. I'm going to keep my focus on heaven. That's the straight and narrow way. Brethren, that's the tough way. Hebrews 9:27, appointed unto man that wants to die. You keep your mind focused beyond the tombstone, because you know you're leaving. It's just a question of when. And one other thing you do, now and then, you do what Job couldn't do. We do it with the eye of faith. We pull back the curtain. We remember that God's in control. Not even the sparrow falls. We remember Job and James 5:11. Indeed, we count them blessed who endured, who have heard of the perseverance of Job, seen the end intended by the Lord. But the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. You see, what I see is just this little bitty time. I don't see the big picture. God sees it all. God sees it all. And we put our trust in Him. And when we learn that level of trust, when we learn how to do that, then we learn how to relax and enjoy life amidst the storms and the trials. I want to take a moment to close in just a little different manner than I normally do. I want to read you a brief little story that came across in my email, of course. That's where we get all our stories nowadays. And I think it helps illustrate what we're talking about here, because you're never going to make the storms of life go away. It's going to be your behavior in the storms of life. So if you'll bear with me for just a moment. So a little girl and her mom had been shopping at Woolworths. She must have been 6 years old, red-headed, freckled face, image of innocence. It was pouring outside, the kind of rain that gushes over the top of the gutters. We all just stood there inside the store. We waited, some patiently, others irritated because nature had messed up their hurried day. I was mesmerized by the rainfall. I got lost in the sights and the sounds of the rain washing away the dust and the dirt of the world. Childhood memories flowed through my mind. I thought about splashing and running in the rain. I just stood there, gazing out. A little voice caught my ear. A little red-haired girl said to her mother, "Mom, let's run through the rain." "What?" Mom asked. "Let's run through the rain," she said again. "No, honey, we'll get soaked." The little girl waited a minute and said, "Mom, let's run through the rain." Mom repeated, "But we'll get soaked." The little girl, ever hopeful, said, "No, we won't. That's not what you said this morning." Puzzled, a little embarrassed because some folks were giggling, Mom said, "What? This morning? When did I ever say we could run through the rain and not get wet? Don't you remember, Mama, when you were talking about Daddy's cancer, and you said if God can get us through this, He can get us through anything?" It got really quiet, dead quiet. Not a voice, not a giggle. We stood there for a moment waiting for Mom's response. It was one of those eternal silences that only lasted a couple of seconds. Some would laugh it off. Some would scold the child for being silly. Some would simply ignore the child. But there was something special in this moment. And the mother, the look on her face, told me that she saw this something special in the moment. I'm not sure if that was joy on her face, resolve, or a realization of a deeper inner peace, but she smiled. She leaned down. She said, "Honey, you're absolutely right. Let's run through the rain. And if God lets us get wet, well, maybe we just needed washing." And off they ran through the rain. And we all stood there smiling and laughing as they darted past the cars and through the puddles. They held their shopping bags up over their head, but they got soaked. Then someone else decided to run. And then another, and another. And they all laughed like little children making their way to their cars. And yes, I ran too. I got soaked. But I needed a refreshing washing of my heart, that awakening of the child within. I needed a reminder that circumstances can take away your health. Circumstances can take away your wealth. But if you know how to run in the rain, nothing can take away your joy and peace. Brethren, our discipleship is so complex, and one facet of it is learning to run in the rain, getting soaked, and maintaining your joy and peace on the way to heaven. And it all begins with Jesus. Have you begun with Jesus? If not, we're here to help any way we can while together we stand and sing.